So, welcome back, and we are on the Avastas of Venus now. Ryan Kurzak from Asheville Vedic Astrology. Please continue our journey.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So last time we were discussing Mercury's Avastas, and Mercury and Venus are really not that far from each other generally when it comes from their position in the chart and also from the Sun. And again, I need to double check this. I don't know why it's slipping my mind, but if I recall correctly, I believe that neither Mercury nor Venus can get more than 29 degrees away from the Sun, generally. But when we're thinking about the Avastas of Venus, we need to understand, what does Venus represent? And so when we think of Venus, it's going to represent, number one, it's going to represent our capacity for romance. It's going to represent our capacity to make decisions that lead to higher fulfillment. It's going to represent women within our life. It's going to represent the conjugal bond, which is, once you get married and you have sex, it's like that energetic connection that you develop. It's going to deal with things like entertainment, our DNA, our recuperative ability. So whenever we have Avastas impacting Venus, that's what's going to be impacted within our life and within our chart. Now, the friends of Venus are Mercury and Saturn, which means anytime Mercury is with Venus or aspecting Venus, it's going to delight that Venus. And we'll discuss what that means. And anytime Saturn is aspecting Venus, it's going to also delight that Venus. And many people don't think of Saturn as being a planet that delights another planet. But Saturn is definitely a friend to Venus. The enemies to Venus are the Sun and the Moon. And this can be somewhat problematic because, as we discussed, Venus is rarely that far from the Sun. And most of the time, just like Mercury, we may find Venus in the sign with the Sun, which is going to cause agitation and possibly starvation or thirst to that Venus. Now, we're going to go ahead and take these examples into this chart so we make them very practical and real. And what we have to determine first and foremost is, what are the Avastas impacting this planet? What are the Avastas impacting this planet? So let's start and let's look at the friends. So first we have Saturn here, and we want to know, is Saturn impacting this Venus? So if we count from Saturn, generally speaking, using the very basic aspects, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we know that Venus is going to be within the range of Saturn's impact to this Venus. And we see here, by going to the Rashis-Avastas screen, it's going to tell us just how much impact does this Saturn have upon Venus based on the Shadbalas and other Avastas of these planets. So here's Venus. We scroll down, and we see that Saturn is giving 102.1 points of aspect to this Venus, which is bringing the power of this Venus up to 573.1 points. So that is taking this Venus and giving it superpowers, essentially. Now, the question arises, well, when we think about how this Saturn is helping this Venus, well, what's going on there? Well, Venus in this chart rules over the person's body, so the first house, sense of self, and Venus rules over the 8th house, which can deal with things like inheritance, other people's money. It can also deal with our vitality and our longevity. And when we consider the fact that Venus is in neutral dignity, we can see that this Venus is going to act at an average level, meaning, is this body going to be severely hurt by having a neutral dignity ascendant lord? Well, there's another type of Avasta called a scarce Avasta, and that's whenever a planet is in neutral dignity, which means the planet can get by. So this Venus will allow the person to get by when it comes to maintaining their health, when it comes to making decisions that support their capacity to have fulfillment with their body and with their health. We also see that this person is going to have the capacity to just get by, to be supported by other people's finances, by other people's money, essentially. And this person does get a lot of support from others. As we discussed with the Mercury video, They don't make really great decisions when it comes to their career and their activity in the world. But if they want to go somewhere, they'll do something like with their work or their business, they'll ask for donations to go, on this retreat to increase their education or increase their knowledge, things of this nature. And they just seem to always get it. And they're very good at providing service to other people. And that's going to come from the Saturn delighting this Venus. So Venus is falling in the 11th house, which deals with gains, financial gains as well. Saturn's in the second house. Is not doing too well because, as we discussed, it's in bad dignity. But it still has the capacity to delight this Venus, which shows that when they want to accomplish their own personal goals, like as I mentioned, going on a retreat somewhere to learn something new, they will be able to say, please, if you wouldn't mind donating to this cause, and then when I get back, I'll volunteer to be of service to you. And sometimes they'll even do things like, I'll clean your house, or I'll do yard work for you. So they do these Saturnine roles, which allows them to achieve their personal goals of this Venus within the 11th house. So they get the finances. They get to achieve their personal goals, 11th house things. And they get that by getting donations from others, support from others, and then giving back through the hard work of Saturn. And that's where that Saturn comes into play of delighting that Venus when we have that second and 11th house being activated. Do you follow how these are connected here?
Wow. Yeah.
Is there anything I can do to help make that clear? Okay. So this is one of those things that when you have Venus being delighted by Saturn, it can still help the person achieve their goals, but by doing hard work.
Sure.
Also, as I mentioned in the previous video about Mercury with this chart, we see that, really when it comes to their marriage doesn't really contribute very well to their career so much because we have the debilitated 7th Lord, marriage partner, going to the 10th for career. And we have the 9th Lord, Mercury, getting pretty significantly starved by the moon, being agitated a bit by the sun, and not in a good sign in Cancer for it, that the marriage partner itself doesn't really support the person's career. And, my estimation of this individual, I don't really trust their marriage partner that much. And it, it mainly is because of the difficulty with the 9th Lord and also the 7th Lord. But since this person's Venus is being aspected by Mercury and so strongly impacted, this person appreciates any love that they get. And that's what you often find when Mercury is delighted by Saturn. That the person, they're not the individual who comes to you and says, when am I going to find Mrs. Right? When is it all going to work out for me beautifully? When are they always going to do exactly what I think they should be doing? They meet all my expectations. They say, you know what? I'm just glad that anyone loves me. And then they're not saying it from a place of, they're not saying poor me. They're just saying, we live in a difficult world, and it's great if we can find love anywhere. And so this person actually has, they feel they have a decently supportive relationship because they just love their partner with all their pluses, all their minuses, all their flaws, and they're just happy to be loved in return. So this is a very easygoing individual. And Saturn is what makes their love life work well because they don't have high expectations, really. And most people who hear this, especially when they're involved in astrology, they'll say, but shouldn't we use astrology to find the one who's going to fulfill us in every single way? And I'll tell you, the most miserable people I know, when it comes to relationships are those individuals that have such high expectations and Saturn is not impacting their Venus at all, that they cannot appreciate love where they get it. And so they're unhappy with their relationships, And that will speak to another issue. This person does not have this, and we'll just discuss it here. One of the more difficult combinations on a relationship is actually Venus being starved by the moon, or Venus with the moon, aspected by the moon. And let's check this chart, just for the sake of instruction. We see.
In that sense, I have one question also, because you were mentioning the sun as an enemy as well, yeah?
Right,
And it is in Leo, as far as I can see.
Yes. Right.
Yeah. So that also will mean starvation.
Oh.
Not starvation, but
Right. It will be starvation because it is in the sun sign. So you're right. So the point that Inga just brought up there was that since we have Venus in the sun's sign, and the sun itself, it's a neutral dignity, we need to check to see how much hurt is Venus getting from the sun. And so coming to the Rashis of Vashta screen, here's Venus. We see again that Venus is being starved to negative 42.5 points. So that's going to put a significant amount of strain on that Venus from the sun. So we'll get to that here in a minute, what that means. But let's just talk about the moon for a moment, if that's okay.
Yes, sorry to this.
No, it's okay. It's a good point. So with Venus and the moon, why is that such a problem? Well, let's see what's going on in this chart. Venus is getting slightly hurt by the moon. And people might say, well, why is that? Because we see that Venus is in the 9th house from the moon. But once more, let's see if I've got the right folder here. Once more, if we check, there it is. These are the actual aspects you have to use, not the general aspects. So we see that with the aspects of Sun, Moon, and Mercury, that when we get a planet directly across from the moon, yes, it's going to have the full strength of its aspect. But that aspect is going to slowly decline as we get down to 300 degrees away. So that Venus is falling
into the 9th.
Yes, it's falling within that, not that one. Whoops. Okay. Venus is falling within that range of degrees, which is why when we look at the Rashis-Vashta screen, which takes that into consideration, we're seeing that 168 points of starvation are going towards that Venus, bringing it down to 302.7. Now, the good news is that Venus still has 302.7 points. So that Venus will be able to resist the strength of the moon there. It's when it gets into a negative, like we have with the sun, that we have a more serious problem. But let's talk about what happens when you do have a Venus with the moon or getting down to negative numbers with that moon to Venus. Why is that a problem? It's the same kind of problem that we had with Mercury and the moon. It's not a problem that the client themselves are going to easily understand or relate to. Because when the moon aspects Venus, they're going to think that all of their needs should be met through their romantic partners. That their romantic partners, or any kind of partner that Venus represents for them, should just intuitively know what they need to do to have a good relationship. So this is the kind of person that goes into a relationship, and they can get in relationships, no problem. But then they start realizing, oh, wait a minute, this other individual, they're not reading my mind. You know, they're not able to just intuitively know what I need to be happy in relationships. And then they start getting angry. They start sort of crossing their arms and saying, well, this isn't a good relationship because you're not putting my needs first. You know, you're not taking time to understand me. So that's that moon, the sense of individuality, the ego, attaching to what they think the romance needs to be, and then they ruin the romance. They ruin the relationship because they're not getting all of their needs met through the relationship. That is the biggest problem with Moon and Venus. And that's the most difficult person to consult, in my experience, when it comes to relationships, because you try to tell them that, and they've been raised in such a way that they believe that the other person should just know exactly how they need to be taken care of. And when they don't, they get fed up, and they don't want to have anything to do with that relationship anymore. So can you see this difference of why Saturn impacting Venus can actually make a relationship work better, and actually getting Moon impacting Venus can actually, over time, erode away the capacity for a relationship to be there. So,
absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, this is, I can't stress it enough. If you have this in your chart, Moon and Venus, you really need to think about yourself and realize that you need to let go of thinking that you're going to get your needs met through a relationship. It doesn't mean you won't, but you're going to have an exaggerated sense of what that means to get your needs met through a relationship. I've got a great friend who's got this combination. He's the sweetest guy, the best guy in the world, but he's got this moon, exalted moon with Venus. And so when you get an exalted moon with Venus, both of them are strong. And he can get in, because it'll be happening here in Taurus, he can beautiful relationship partners. He can get very caring, kind relationship partners. Anyone that if you would see him, you would think, wow, that's a great match. But over time, it slowly erodes away because he starts saying, well, they do this and they don't take me seriously. And he makes the relationship all about him. And that's the problem with Moon and Venus. The people make the relationship all about themselves. So anyway, any questions or thoughts on that before I move on to some of these other Avashtas?
Please continue. You have spoken a brilliant point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And one final disclaimer, I don't mean to say these things to be judgmental about people. I say them because I want people to just consider the possibility that might be something that actually gets in the way of your relationship. That's all. Just consider it. Even if you don't believe it, just consider it.
Absolutely. Well said.
Okay.
Well, one more note on that would be that there is no human being without issues on this earth.
Right.
Yeah?
Exactly.
We all have issues. Everybody has issues, and that is one. Right.
Exactly. Yeah, good point. So moving on then. So Inga brought up the point about the Sun and Venus. And this happens a lot with people, as I mentioned, because the Venus is rarely far away from the Sun. But it can also occur when we have Venus in the sign of Leo. And think about this. When people think about Venus and Leo, especially if you get Ketu with Venus and Leo, that's a real trip. Because now we have Venus in a sign of royalty and nobility. And we have Venus, which is a sign of luxury, of enjoyment, of really worldly, sensate desires. That can be very good for, again, wealth and luxury. It's excellent. But the problem that occurs there is when you get Venus and Leo, the person might get sidetracked because they're too much engaged in thinking about, does this feel right? Does this feel good? Is this going to contribute to more diplomatic power? Because the Sun deals with things like the government and leadership roles, and we know Venus deals with things like diplomacy. So when Sun starves or hurts Venus, often what comes about is the person's desires, their inspirations, are a little bit too worldly minded. We know that Venus is the guru of the asharas, which we need in the world to make the world happen, but those are the more sensate desires. And when you get Ketu and Venus together, that's when you say, especially if it's a woman, you say they've got like a princess complex. I think that's what they describe. Because they want to be catered to, they want to be taken care of. And oftentimes when you get Venus and Ketu together in Leo, it can show someone who in past lifetimes maybe has spent a lot of time as royalty, as nobility. And so they come into this lifetime, and now they've got a chart where they're meant to be a manager at a fast food restaurant, and they're thinking, what is this all about? Where's my luxury? Why am I not getting paid 10 times more than I'm worth? They have all these things, and it brings this kind of entitlement issue. So when it comes to the Sun starving Venus, oftentimes the person doesn't make good decisions about following their inspiration in life because they're too caught up in, as I mentioned, luxury or being seen as something great. And with this chart, we do see this happening. We see that this Venus is getting starved by the Sun to negative 42.5 points. We've discussed how Venus is getting helped by Saturn, and so they're able to accomplish their goals with 11th house and 12th house things. But what happens again? Well, now we have Sun, which is in the 10th house, ruling the 11th, starving this Venus. So we already know from the description of Mercury that this person puts too much emphasis on grace, on things will just work out. They're not able to be disciplined enough to attend to their duties, to do something what they might consider to be great within the world. With that moon starving Mercury, that they're too ruled by their emotions when it comes to their career. And one of the things this person's always talking to me about with this Venus is, they say, Ryan, they say, you charge an awful lot for your sessions. Like, how come you're able to do that, but I'm not? and I have to chuckle, and I say, well, how often do you put attention to your work and your career? And they say, well, you're right, not that much. And I say, how often do you think I do that? Like, well, you seem to be kind of doing that all day long and you're booked up for a couple months out. I'm like, exactly. I say the reason we have that different level there, or that different wavelength, is because I put a lot of time and attention to my career and my work, at least I feel I do, and I don't just wait for things to kind of fall into my lap or for people to give me things. So when I first started doing astrology, I didn't even want to charge people. I was just doing it on donation basis, and I did that for a number of years because I wanted to make sure that I was giving people something that was of value, right? And eventually, since it had turned into a work for me that I had to pay my mortgage and these sorts of things, I turned it into a platform to make this possible. But it was based on the work of doing it on a donation basis to build up to that. What this person wants is not that. I wish they would want that because that would be great for them. But what they want is they want to just say, hey, you know, I'm a yoga teacher, I'm a Reiki practitioner, I'm a healer, I just finished my classes 3 weeks ago, so pay me all this money to work with you. They don't want to do the hard work to build up a practice, to do word of mouth, you know, to be known through word of mouth. They just want it to be given to them. They want the luxuries given to them. They want the wealth just given to them in an exaggerated sense. And that's oftentimes what happens when we'll get something like a a Venus-Sun combination. There's an entitlement complex there. So it's not an easy combination to discuss either, especially as I mentioned with Mercury and Venus, where you get this Saturn Rahu combination in the second house, where it shows that part of their path in this life is to develop their capacity to take care of their resources, to do the hard work, to learn what it means to say for 5 years, I'm going to get paid hardly nothing so that I do good work and build up name recognition based on the work I've done, not because someone gave me $10,000 to just advertise telling people how great I am. Do you follow what I'm getting at here?
Absolutely,
yes. Very interesting point, actually. Yeah, because we are talking about many varied points of one person, and that actually comes down to astrology. It is not only one combination or one planet or this or that. It is a mixture of many different influences.
Right.
It comes out very nicely in today's session.
Yes, the Avastas are deeply uncovering the intricacies, what's not so seen. So,
and you're both putting the good point there. You have to look at the whole chart, right? Because this might have played out very differently. As I mentioned, if the Saturn would have been in good dignity, it might have played out very differently. If this Rahu was somewhere else in the chart, it would have played out very differently if their 10th Lord wasn't in the third, starving this Mercury. So that is the point that you're getting at, which is one I think needs to be really drilled in, is that when I talk about Navashta, I'm not just saying, oh, look, here's Venus getting starved by the sun and delighted by Mercury, and then that's it. I have gone through and looked at the whole chart to see, are there other things that support and contribute to the particular outcome, which is what makes it so hard to do them, but what makes them so rewarding in the first place.
Yes.
Right. So
in that sense, we also have the dasha sequence, so we will see what actually will work out when.
Yes. And so to that point, when we're thinking about the dashas, I'm going to be looking at when Sun and Venus are running to see when is this particular thing going to be activated. I'm going to look to see when is Saturn and Venus running, to see when is that particular aspect of this Avashta coming out. So the Avashtas, number one, they're not static. They are moving through the dashas. And number two, you can't make an assessment about Navashta until you've gone through and looked at every planet. So real quick aside there, when I, excuse me, I need some tea.
Sure.
So when I look at, or when I teach in the apprenticeship program, we start at the very beginning. And we say, here's one planet. Now, look up everything that you can about that planet, such as what's the planet's dignity? What planets are Rashi aspecting that planet? What houses does that planet rule over? And where does that planet go? So what are the Bhava yogas? what are the planetary aspects, not just the Rashi, but the planetary aspects in that planet. And when you get done, I tell my students, I say, you should have written out all your notes for one planet. And then you move on to the next planet. And you do the exact same thing, go through all the steps, and then you go back through your notes and find, okay, when I looked at this planet, it said that this person is going to be kind of selfish in regards to their relationships. And then when I look at this planet, it says this person is going to be selfish in regards to their career. So I take those things which are similar and we overlap them and say, all right, this is where the problem is going to come out in regards to relationships and career, which is why, for example, with this chart, which we've used for both Mercury and Venus, I keep referring back to other parts of the chart because it's those other parts which are telling me how the Avashta itself is going to express. I hope I was clear on that. Do you follow? Did I make
last bit of a point? Not quite.
Okay. Okay. So what I mean is, I want to know what is Rahu and Saturn doing, right? And since it's happening in the house that deals with their finances and their wealth and their resources and being responsible and disciplined about it, okay? And then I store that in my mind, that's probably an issue they're going to have. And then I see Venus is in the 11th house, being starved by the 11th house Lord, which also deals with wealth and gains. And I know that Venus deals with like entitlement issues, especially since it's being starved by the sun, that this just further shows that they might not put a whole lot of attention to their discipline and their responsibilities of this Rahu and Saturn because they have an entitlement mentality that it should just be taken care of for them. So you see, I take one chunk and I look at the other chunk and I see how can that wrap together to give me the full story. That's where these things are going to start making more sense. But the problem that people do is they just want to take one. Like they want to get out the Avashta's chapter and they want to see. Let me just find it here. They want to see that. Where's Venus? Okay, so they want to see that. Sun is starving Venus. And then they'll read, the sun represents ambitions, goals, status, and sacrifice. The sun starving Venus creates ambitions that take a person away from fulfilling relationships. The fulfillment Venus can provide is sacrificed in exchange for goals, status, and the role in life that the sun represents. Well, that will be partially true for this individual, but we have to think about everything else that led up to it to see how else is this going to play out. And that's why you can use these kinds of texts to get an idea, but you can't use it to make the final, this is it. Yeah. They're just guides. Don't do cookbook astrology. You learn the recipe so that you can learn how to tweak the recipe as you go. You don't learn it to just say, this is it, and that's all it's going to be.
Yeah, but it is notes. Yeah, that will be one part, and one has to put them together, but in the end.
Right. And that's why I recently did a video on why Kala was such great astrology software. And I took a half hour where I just went through all of the things that Kala Vedic astrology software can do. And someone posted at the end, they said, well, what they could add is what all these combinations mean. And I just had a chuckle because I thought, well, first of all, I don't think you understand how complicated it is to create astrology software. And second of all, it seems to me that, you're wanting the program to do what the human part has to do, right? Yes. Which is figure out how they all come together. But anyway, with Venus and the sun, last thing we'll say, and then we'll just take some questions. Going back to that description, the sun represents our capacity to do great things. And anytime the sun's impact in a certain area of the chart, oftentimes we will have to sacrifice that thing. Now, as we know, this person does have delight from Saturn going towards this Venus, so that helps out quite a bit. But this person will find that in the long run, I'm kind of curious what's going to happen when they get to their next, let's see, what would it be? When they get Saturn opposite this Venus, that's what I'm waiting to see, because they've just recently gotten into this relationship a few years ago, this marriage. And I'm kind of concerned what's going to happen when Saturn gets here into Aquarius, and when Sun also gets here. Sun gets into Aquarius and Sun comes back to Leo. Because during that time, we're going to have some separative factors hitting that Venus. And I might I have the sense, and I've told them about this, that they might end up sacrificing this relationship because of whatever they think greatness they need to do, or they're really interested in starting like an organization. I don't really think they've got the managerial skills based on that Mercury to do it. But I have a feeling that what's going to happen is they're going to try to start some kind of organization or follow through with this kind of inspiration, and their spouse or partner isn't going to be supportive of it, and that might cause the relationship to break up. So we'll see. Yeah. And they're not
5 years after.
Yeah, so they've got a ways to go. But, that is a concern that I've talked to them about. So they're aware of it, and they're doing some remedial measures. So I'm on the fence, but we'll see how it plays out for them. So anyway, these are general ways to look at avashtas of Venus. One last thing I will say is when we get Saturn and Venus, that this is a difficult combination like Mercury and Saturn, because again, what we're going to find here, that the person will have a really hard time feeling comfort within the world. Because Venus is that capacity to feel nourished and comfortable in life. And when we get Saturn with Venus, oftentimes the person just never feels like, no matter what kind of luxury they get, no matter what kind of good thing comes into their life, that it's just really never enough. And so I'll see this oftentimes with wealthy people who have a lot of money, a lot of latitude within life, and they'll say, but it's just never fulfilling. And it's because that Saturn never allows them to appreciate the luxury. And that can go a couple different ways. Sometimes it can drive them to addiction or addictive tendencies because they're always trying to fill that hole. Or it can cause them to continuously try to push the boundaries with, what is this next desire going to be fulfilled? And they still never get there. So with Saturn and Venus combinations, I really, truly recommend that people try to develop a very good spiritual practice. Like this is great for someone who wants to be a nun or a monk or a renunciate, because they can learn to transcend their attachment to the desires of Venus. But it can be very difficult for someone who's more materially minded.
Well, just in normal life, it is very, okay, one can pick up a spiritual practice. We know you are also teaching Kriya Yoga. So
right.
You are very much on that path.
Right.
So that is one discipline which you are following, one practice.
Right.
Yeah. But to become a monk, I mean, you have to say bye-bye.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's quite ahead,
It's interesting. I mean, the one of the comments that I've heard that Yogananda had said one time was that when people wanted to like run off and become a nun or a monk, or run off into the Himalayas to be with the yogis or whatever, he would say things like, he's met those yogis who are renunciates in the hills, and that during the day they argue about philosophy, and at night they argue about who gets the firewood. So he says, so even when you do that, sometimes you're not necessarily able to get away from it. And then that brings us to the idea of what true renunciation is, which is learning to be in the world but not affected by it. So
exactly, that's what he said as well.
Yeah, right, exactly. So
it's easy to go and meditate sitting under a tree, but
right.
It's not easy to be conscious and aware and act rightfully in a world.
Exactly. And even,
difficulty, and it was a difficulty for him as well.
It's a difficulty for everybody. It's not the easiest thing, but if we're going to be renunciates and we're going to think about this Venus and Saturn, one way to work it would be just let go of your expectations about the world fulfilling you.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that you don't go, be in a relationship. It doesn't mean that you don't go have fun with your friends. It doesn't mean that you don't go on vacation. It just means that you don't expect that those things are going to be the thing that finally clinches it for you. You can say, I'm released into comfort and I feel bliss. It's just, you have to learn to go within for that. But it doesn't mean you neglect your duties within the world. So we do have to be very cautious of that.
Absolutely.
So a person with that combination would have a certain liking or aim or desire for doing so?
Hopefully. I mean, that's the trick, is that when you've got that, and there are other factors within the chart that support like healthy renunciation or spirituality in that way, yes, they will do that. But you can have, like, for example, let's say you get Rahu on the ascendant, which gives a very intense nature to explore the world. And you get that Rahu, and then you get that matched up with Saturn and Venus, then the person has a lot of confusion about how they're supposed to be in the world and attend to their duties, but then let go of the fact that they're not getting all the what's the word? All the fulfillment they think they should get. So you can drive yourself mad with that kind of a combination. So we can't make that statement unless we see the rest of the chart. But Saturn and Venus, it's not the easiest, and if it falls in the house of relationship or marriage, that's a little bit worse, because then those are definitely going to be the kinds of individuals that are always writing, saying, when am I going to get married with the person that's going to make it all right? You know, when am I going to find the person that is going to make me feel like I'm okay, like I can be myself? And you never find it. You got to tell them, you know, you got to do some inner work, and they don't really respond to that very well. So it really just depends on how the rest of the chart plays out. But
that's brilliant.
So these are my final thoughts on the Avastas. We didn't go through them all, but you know, I think over the course of our time together, we've touched on enough of them that we can, you know, find our way through them. But are there any final questions that I could answer before we conclude the series?
Let me just say it was a great series, and it has a great value because we have touched upon so many points sideways of it. That if one will take the aim to understand the Avastas, he will certainly do through this series. It is a course, in fact.
Well, it gave us some very deep insight.
Yeah.
Even though I'm sitting in the dark. You have brought much light on the subject.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate the opportunity, because they're a really great topic to study.
Fantastic.
They are.
Definitely.
All right.
So in this regard, we're gonna finish and call it a day today with this series, and we are looking forward for another series with you soon.
On the Vargas, right? Are we going to be able to put
the Vargas? Yes.
Yes, that will be wonderful. I can't wait. I can't wait to get into that, because we can take these. We will be able to take these Vargas or these Avastas into the Vargas.
Yes.
We can think of it as an extension. It'll be beautiful. Yeah.
Fantastic. Let's do it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure. I appreciate it.